They called me trash boy when I collected rags from garbage bins. Today, those same people pay $5,000 for a single piece from my collection. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is how I went from sleeping in alleys to owning Fashion Week. I need you to understand something. When you're born into poverty, the world doesn't just ignore you. It actively works against you. Every door's locked. Every opportunity is reserved for people who look different, sound different, and smell different than you do. My story begins in the garment district of downtown Los Angeles. My parents were illegal immigrants who worked 16-hour shifts in sweatshops for less than minimum wage. They'd come home with their fingers bleeding from needle pricks, their backs bent from hunching over sewing machines all day. By the time I was 12, I knew we were drowning. The apartment we called home was actually a storage room above a fabric warehouse. No windows, no heat, just concrete walls and the constant smell of industrial dye. My younger sister Maya and I slept on the floor, while our parents took turns resting on a mattress they'd found in an alley. The ceiling leaked when it rained, creating puddles that we'd catch in buckets and empty cans. In winter, we'd huddle together under layers of fabric scraps our parents brought home from work, remnants that were destined for the trash anyway. But here's the thing about growing up in the garment district. You're surrounded by fashion, but you're invisible to it. Every day, I'd watch trucks deliver thousands of dollars worth of fabric to the factories. Italian silk, French lace, Japanese denim, materials that cost more per yard than my family made in a week. I'd see designers in expensive cars pulling up to meetings, their assistants carrying garment bags worth more than our annual rent. I'd watch models walking around in clothes that cost more than my family made in 6 months, treating $2,000 jackets like disposable items. And then, I'd go home to my storage room and wear the same 3 t-shirts I'd owned for 2 years. The contrast was suffocating. I was living in the heart of the fashion world, but I might as well have been on another planet. School wasn't an escape, it was another reminder of my place in the hierarchy. While other kids worried about which designer backpack to carry, I was calculating whether I could afford lunch or if I should save that $3 for bus fare home. Teachers looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration, as if my poverty was a personal failing that reflected badly on their classroom. By the time I was 14, I was working after school and weekends, helping my parents meet their quotas at the sweatshop. I'd sit in those fluorescent-lit rooms for hours, watching skilled seamstresses create beautiful garments that they'd never be able to afford themselves. Irony was crushing. The people with the most talent were paid the least, while the people who contributed nothing but their names made millions. That's when I started paying attention to what happened to the waste. Every day, the factories would throw out bags and bags of perfectly good materials. Fabric that had minor flaws, thread that was the wrong color, patterns that had been cut incorrectly. All of it went straight to the dumpster. I watched skilled craftspeople create beautiful samples that would be discarded the moment a client said, "Not quite what we're looking for." The waste wasn't just materials, it was human potential. I'd see workers who had incredible creative instincts, who could look at a piece of fabric and immediately envision how to transform it into something beautiful. But they were never asked for their opinions, never consulted on design decisions. They were treated like machines, valued only for their ability to execute other people's visions. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in March when I was 16. I'd been kicked out of school the week before, not for bad grades, but because I couldn't afford the mandatory uniform fee. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, had called me into her office and explained with fake sympathy that education is important, but rules are rules. She suggested I could return when my family could prioritize my education properly. So instead of sitting in algebra class, I was behind the Mason Brothers textile factory, going through their dumpster looking for anything we could sell. This wasn't unusual. Dozens of people scavenged through fashion industry waste every day, looking for materials they could resell to smaller manufacturers or crafters. That's when I found it. Buried under scraps of polyester and cotton waste, there was this piece of silk, but it wasn't just any silk. It was hand-embroidered with intricate patterns that looked like they'd taken months to complete. The base fabric was a deep midnight blue, and the embroidery was done in gold thread that caught the light like jewelry. Someone had spent hundreds of hours creating something that was truly art, not just clothing, and they'd thrown it away because of a small tear in one corner, maybe an inch long, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I held that piece of fabric in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never experienced before: rage. Not the helpless anger of being poor, not the frustration of being ignored, but focused fury at the waste, at the disrespect, at a system that threw away beauty while people like my family could barely afford ugliness. As I stood there in that alley, surrounded by dumpsters full of discarded dreams, I had an epiphany. The fashion industry wasn't just wasteful, it was blind. They couldn't see the value in their own discards. They couldn't recognize the skill and artistry that went into creating the things they threw away. And most importantly, they couldn't imagine that someone like me, someone they considered trash, might be able to see what they missed. That night, I made a decision that would either destroy me or save me. I was going to turn that piece of discarded silk into something worth more than the people who threw it away could imagine. I'd watched my parents sew for years. I knew how to operate a machine, how to cut patterns, how to join seams. But what I was planning was different. I wasn't going to just repair that fabric. I was going to transform it into something that had never existed before. The first challenge was workspace. Our storage room was too small and too dark for detailed work. So I made a deal with Mr. Rodriguez, who managed the warehouse below us. In exchange for cleaning the space every evening, I could use a corner of the warehouse after hours. He thought I was crazy, but he appreciated having someone ensure the building was secure at night. Using a sewing machine my mother had smuggled home from work, piece by piece, over several months so no one would notice, I spent the next 3 weeks creating my first piece. I cut the damaged silk into geometric shapes, then reconstructed it with visible stitching that turned the repair into a design element. I added pieces of leather I'd found in another dumpster, creating contrast and texture. I incorporated metal hardware that I'd salvaged from discarded belts and bags, turning functional elements into decorative features. But the real breakthrough came when I started thinking about the garment as a story, not just a piece of clothing. This silk had been created by skilled craftspeople, then discarded by people who couldn't see its value. My job wasn't just to repair it, it was to honor the original artisans while also making a statement about waste and value in the fashion industry. The finished jacket looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. It wasn't trying to imitate established fashion trends, it was creating its own aesthetic language. The visible repair work became a celebration of imperfection. The mixed materials created unexpected harmonies of texture and color. The overall effect was something that felt both ancient and futuristic, handmade and high-tech. When I was finished, I'd created something that looked nothing like traditional fashion, but somehow felt more authentic than anything I'd seen in store windows. The hard part wasn't making the piece, it was finding someone willing to look at it. For 2 months, I carried that jacket in a garbage bag, trying to get anyone in the fashion industry to give me 5 minutes. I researched designers, stylists, boutique owners, fashion bloggers, anyone who might be willing to look at work from an unknown creator. Security guards threw me out of showrooms before I could even explain what I was carrying. Receptionists called police when I tried to enter office buildings. One designer's assistant actually spit on me when I approached her outside a cafe, telling me that people like me were ruining the neighborhood. The rejection wasn't just professional, it was personal. These people looked at my clothes, my appearance, my accent, and immediately decided I had nothing to offer. They couldn't imagine that someone who looked like me, who came from where I came from, might have something valuable to contribute to their world. But I kept trying, because I knew I had created something special. Every rejection just made me more determined to prove them wrong. I started studying the industry more carefully, learning the names of key players, understanding the unwritten rules about how fashion worked. I read every magazine, followed every blog, memorized the histories of successful designers who had started with nothing. And eventually, persistence paid off in the most unexpected way. I was sitting outside the Nordstrom flagship store, trying to work up the courage to go inside, when this woman approached me. She was probably in her 40s, well-dressed but not intimidating like most fashion people I'd encountered. She moved with confidence, but without the aggressive energy that seemed to define most industry insiders. "Are you selling that?" she asked, pointing to my jacket. I was so shocked that someone had actually spoken to me without hostility that I almost couldn't respond. It's not for sale, I stammered. I'm trying to show it to designers. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd received from anyone in the fashion world. I am a designer. Well, I'm a stylist, actually. Sarah Mitchell. I work with musicians and actors. I found out later that Sarah had been watching me for 20 minutes, studying how I held the jacket, how I moved, how I interacted with people who ignored me. She told me she could see something in my eyes that most young designers didn't have. Desperation mixed with absolute certainty. She'd grown up poor herself in Detroit and had fought her way into the fashion industry by being better, more creative, and more persistent than anyone expected. "Show me what you've got," she said. I pulled the jacket out of the bag with shaking hands. Sarah examined it for what felt like an hour, turning it inside out, checking every seam, every design choice. She asked me about my process, about where I'd found the materials, about the techniques I'd used. Unlike everyone else I'd tried to show my work to, she seemed genuinely curious about the creative decisions I'd made. Finally, she looked up at me. "This is incredible work. The construction is flawless, but more than that, this tells a story. Where did you learn to do this?" I told her everything, about my parents, about the storage room, about finding the silk in the dumpster, about the rage that had driven me to create something beautiful from waste, about the months of rejection and the growing certainty that I had something unique to offer. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said 5 words that changed my life. "I want to buy this." She paid me $800 cash on the spot, more money than I'd ever seen at one time. But more importantly, she gave me something worth more than money, validation. Someone who understood fashion had looked at my work and seen value. "Make me 5 more pieces," she said. "I have a client who's going to love your aesthetic, but I need them to be consistent with this quality level. Can you do that?" I promised her I could, even though I had no idea how I was going to source materials for 5 more pieces. That night, I went to every dumpster in the garment district, collecting discarded fabrics and hardware. I spent the next 6 weeks working 16-hour days, creating pieces that were individual works of art, but also cohesive as a collection. That client turned out to be Jessica Alba, who wore my jacket to a movie premiere 3 weeks later. The fashion blogs went crazy trying to identify the designer of this unique piece that looked like nothing they'd ever seen. The jacket was photographed from every angle, analyzed by fashion critics, and shared across social media platforms. Sarah didn't reveal my name immediately. She wanted to build mystery, to let demand grow before introducing the world to the story behind the clothes. The response was unlike anything I could have imagined. Fashion insiders were calling Sarah's office, begging to know who had created the jacket. Style influencers were trying to track down similar pieces. Fashion students were attempting to recreate the aesthetic. I'd created something that resonated with people on a level that went beyond trends or seasonal collections. Within a month, I had orders for 20 pieces. Within 6 months, I was making $10,000 a month, creating one-of-a-kind garments from discarded materials. I'd moved my family out of the storage room and into a real apartment with windows and heat and separate bedrooms. My parents quit their sweatshop jobs and started working for me full-time, using their skills to help create pieces instead of just executing other people's designs. But that was just the beginning. The real breakthrough came when Anna Wintour's assistant saw one of my pieces at a gallery opening and asked to meet with me. I'll never forget walking into the Vogue offices, still carrying my designs in garbage bags because I couldn't afford proper garment bags, and presenting my work to the most powerful woman in fashion. Anna studied my pieces in complete silence for 10 minutes. She examined the construction, the material choices, the way I'd integrated waste recovery with high-level craftsmanship. Then she looked at me and said, "You're not just designing clothes. You're designing a revolution." 6 months later, I was on the cover of Vogue, not wearing someone else's clothes, but wearing my own designs, with the headline, "The Trash Prince." How Marcus Chen is saving fashion from itself. That cover changed everything. Orders poured in from celebrities, from collectors, from museums who wanted to display my work as art. I went from being invisible to being unavoidable. Fashion Week invited me to show my collection. Luxury boutiques begged to carry my pieces. Investment firms offered to fund my expansion. But success in fashion isn't just about making beautiful things. It's about building a business that can sustain itself while staying true to your vision. I knew that if I wanted to go from being a novelty act to being a real force in the industry, I needed to scale up while maintaining the authenticity that made my work special. The solution came to me while I was visiting a landfill outside Los Angeles, looking for materials for my next collection. I was surrounded by literally tons of discarded textiles, clothes that had been worn once, factory overruns that had never been sold, fabric scraps from manufacturing processes. The scale was overwhelming, but it also represented the biggest business opportunity I'd ever seen. I realized that the fashion industry's waste problem wasn't just an environmental issue. It was a supply chain inefficiency that I could solve while building a sustainable competitive advantage. Instead of creating individual pieces from found materials, what if I could create an entire supply chain based on waste recovery and upcycling? What if I could turn the fashion industry's biggest liability, its waste stream, into my biggest asset? I used my first $1 million in profit to buy a warehouse in downtown LA. Instead of filling it with new equipment, I filled it with the most advanced textile recovery and processing systems I could design. I hired chemists to develop ways to break down blended fabrics into their component materials. I hired engineers to create machinery that could transform waste into high-quality raw materials. I partnered with universities to research new techniques for fiber recovery and reconstruction. Most importantly, I hired dozens of skilled craftspeople, many of them immigrants like my parents, and paid them 3 times what they'd been making in traditional factories. I wanted to create a working environment that honored skill and creativity instead of treating people like machines. The Chen Industries textile recovery process became the foundation of my fashion empire. Instead of competing with other designers for the same expensive materials, I was creating an entirely new category of luxury goods based on sustainability and social responsibility. Our processes could take a discarded polyester dress and transform it into high-grade technical fabric. We could process cotton waste into materials that were stronger and more durable than virgin cotton. Within 3 years, we were processing over 10,000 tons of textile waste annually and turning it into materials that were not just environmentally responsible, but actually superior to traditional fabrics. Our recycled silk was stronger and more durable than virgin silk. Our reconstructed cotton had unique textures and colors that couldn't be replicated through conventional manufacturing. The technology we developed became as valuable as the fashion we produced. Other brands started licensing our processes. Governments consulted with us on waste management policies. Environmental organizations celebrated us as pioneers in sustainable manufacturing. By the time I was 25, Chen Industries had grown from a one-person operation to a company employing over 2,000 people across 5 countries. We weren't just a fashion brand. We were a technology company, a manufacturing operation, and a social movement all rolled into one. The fashion world that had once rejected me was now desperately trying to copy what I'd created. Major luxury brands started launching their own sustainable lines, but they could never replicate the authenticity of actually building a company from the ground up based on waste recovery. They were adding sustainability as a marketing feature. For us, it was the fundamental principle that drove every decision we made. Today, at 28 years old, I'm worth $4.2 billion. Chen Industries processes textile waste for over 200 fashion brands worldwide. Our direct-to-consumer fashion line generates $800 million in annual revenue. We've opened manufacturing facilities in 12 countries, always hiring locally and paying wages that are 300% above local minimums. But the number I'm most proud of is this: We've kept over 500,000 tons of textile waste out of landfills and turned it into something beautiful. Last month, I bought the building where my family used to live in that storage room. I'm turning it into a free design school for low-income students. The first class starts next semester, and my sister Maya, who just graduated from Parsons with a degree in fashion design, is going to be the director. The same people who called me trash boy now call me a visionary. The same security guards who used to kick me out of showrooms now ask for selfies when they see me at Fashion Week. The same magazines that wouldn't return my calls now compete to feature my work on their covers. But I never want to forget where I came from. Every morning I start my day the same way I did when I was 16, by going through discarded materials and looking for something that other people have missed. The difference is that now, instead of digging through dumpsters, I have a team of 50 scouts around the world who identify waste streams and recovery opportunities. The fashion industry generates 92 million tons of textile waste every year. Most of it ends up in landfills or gets burned. But I see something different when I look at those numbers. I see 92 million tons of raw materials for the next generation of luxury goods. People ask me what my secret is, how someone like me managed to succeed in an industry that's famously exclusive and elitist. The answer is simple. I never tried to fit into their world. Instead, I built a better world and made them come to me. When you grow up with nothing, you learn to see value where other people see waste. When you're invisible to society, you develop the superpower of seeing things that other people miss. When you're desperate enough, you become willing to take risks that comfortable people would never consider. My name is Marcus Chen. I went from collecting rags in garbage bins to owning the most innovative fashion company in the world. And I did it all by remembering a simple truth. One person's trash really can become another person's treasure. The boy they called Trash Boy is now the king of fashion, and this is just the beginning. If this story inspired you, like the video, subscribe, and write in the comments which impossible dream do you want to achieve. Thank you for the watching.